Welcome to the Twisted Libra Cemetery, where there is always life after death. Welcome to the cemetery, my lovelies. I am your delightfully wicked host, the Twisted Libra, and this is Craving the Darkness, the official podcast of the Twisted Libra Cemetery. Do you like dark things? Are you drawn to the macabre? Then you, my friend, have come to the right place. Grab a seat on a tombstone and join me now as we take a look at today's topic, vampires. Pretty much everyone has heard of Dracula. The mere mention of the name conjures visions of black capes, widow's peaks, and a heavy Eastern European accent. The novel, written by Bram Stoker, was first published on May 26, 1897. This date is now officially recognized as World Dracula Day. What began as a book evolved into a stage play, and then eventually made its way to film and television. Bram Stoker essentially invented an entirely new genre, didn't he? Well, not exactly. Vampire stories existed long before Count Dracula bared his fangs. In 1872, 25 years before Dracula came to be, J. Sheridan Le Fanu gave us Carmilla. John Polidori wrote The Vampire in 1819. And Varney the Vampire was published in 1845 by James Malcolm Rymer and Thomas Peckett Prest. Even earlier than that was Samuel Taylor Coleridge's Christabel, an 1816 tale which featured a temptress with vampiric qualities. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe's 1797 The Bride of Corinth featured a revenant who drains life from others. Bram Stoker wasn't exactly the forebearer of the vampire genre after all. So why is his version of the vampire so well known? Stoker's famous Count wasn't initially well received. In fact, Dracula never really took off during Stoker's lifetime. He passed away in 1912. 12 years later, an Irish actor/writer named Hamilton Deane approached Stoker's widow to get the rights to create a stage play based on the Dracula novel. With her blessing, he wrote the stage version in 1924. In 1927, he collaborated with American writer John Balderston to update the European play for modern American audiences. This American version of the play served as the influence for the 1931 Universal film that catapulted both Dracula and Bela Lugosi into pop culture history. Fun fact, Bela Lugosi first played Dracula on the stage before gracing the silver screen. He debuted his take on the infamous Count in the Broadway run of the American play on October 5th, 1927. Since October 5th happens to be your beloved Twisted Libra's birthday, I suppose you could say that Bela's Dracula and Twisted Libra were born on the same day. The film version by Universal kicked off a cinematic zeitgeist known as the monster movie. Films featuring werewolves, mummies, and resurrected corpses poured out of Hollywood. Dracula began to show up in other films as well as on television. Bela Lugosi became so synonymous with the fanged fiend that his acting career seemingly stalled. Audiences only saw him as Count Dracula, not the leading man he aspired to be. Over the years, Dracula has been adapted more than any other character. There are over 200 films that depict Stoker's creation in some form. Throw in various television shows and books, among other forms of media, and Dracula is undoubtedly the most widely known vampire in history. His popularity stems not from any originality per se, but from advancements in both technology and marketing. True, there are adaptations and palpable influences from the likes of Carmilla and Lord Riven, from the Hammer films to anime. However, the recognition of Count Dracula, particularly Lugosi's version, has attained a global reach that none of its counterparts have ever been able to match. The idea of the vampire has changed drastically since its humble beginnings in Eastern European folklore. What originated as a terrifying threat to humanity has now become a desirable and often sexually fetishized paramour. Bela Lugosi's Dracula sought out his prey with no regard to their loss of life or the effect their deaths may have had on those around them. He was callous and calculating, while presenting a sophisticated air to lure victims into a false sense of security. He had no interest in love or connection, only a desire to conquer. Flash forward to the 1980s, and the infamous Lost Boys not only shared these traits, but they also actually found pleasure in terrorizing their victims and murdering for sheer entertainment. These days, many people like to blame the shift in vampire depiction from deadly killer to brooding heartthrob on Twilight's Edward Cullen. While he definitely had an impact on the genre, the idea of romantic, brooding vampires actually came about decades prior. Anne Rice's 1976 novel Interview with the Vampire gave us the dark and contemplative Louis de Poindexter, later portrayed with ironic precision by Brad Pitt in the 1994 film. The 1991 book series The Vampire Diaries presented us with not only attractive vampires, but this time around they were teenagers. This eventually was adapted into the wildly popular 2009 television series by the same name. The 90s also gave us one of my favorite books, The Silver Kiss. This was a romance centered around a teen vampire. Buffy the Vampire Slayer hit movie theaters in 1992, and while it didn't give sway to the idea of vampire romance, its 1997 television counterparts certainly did. The Buffy TV show included the brooding male vampire Angel, who fell hopelessly in love with the one person destined to end him, chosen vampire slayer Buffy Summers. The story didn't get quite the happy ending for these two, and went on to get a sort of trope remix when Buffy subsequently fell for bad boy vampire Spike, thus causing him to abandon his killer persona for, you guessed it, the brooding, hopeless romantic. By the time Edward Cullen entered the chat, the idea of a vampire being a dark, brooding, lost soul in need of just the right human to show them how to love had gone from unimaginable to industry standard. These days, vampire novels are seeing a resurgence. However, the vampire element is being pushed into subgenre status under the umbrella of the newer and ever-growing paranormal romance genre. I suppose other monsters need love too. Now, as much as I adore vampires, there are a few little odds and ends about them that plague me. First off is fang placement. Now, I consider myself a traditionalist when it comes to which teeth should be the fang. I'm on Team Canine. Bram Stoker even described his main character's canine teeth in his novel, but there are many adaptations that feature the lateral incisors as the fangs instead. The previously mentioned Lost Boys, which I truly do love, is guilty of this. To me, it just looks wrong. Not to be outdone, the 2005 television juggernaut Supernatural basically said, "Hold my beer," and gave their vampires a full mouth of hideous fangs. Another thing that doesn't quite add up is the vulnerability to sunlight. I say this because being that the moon reflects sunlight, and that reflection is essentially why we have moonlight at night, theoretically a vampire should also be vulnerable to moonlight, right? How can a vampire walk around in the moonlight if sunlight is so deadly? Lastly, it bothers me that the lore seems to be selective. Some vampires can walk in the sun, some can't. Some die by a stake through the heart, others only if that stake is of a particular type of wood. Some drain to kill, others cannot drain to kill lest they take that death upon themselves. There's a lack of consistency, and many authors play fast and loose with the caveats. Regardless of the shortcomings of today's vampire, it remains my favorite monster. No doubt you agree, or else you wouldn't be listening now. The vampire has haunted our existence for centuries, and although the modern vampire has little resemblance to its creature of origin, I think we can all agree that vampires are essentially badass and won't be going away anytime soon. Well, that closes the coffin lid on our vampire discussion. For now, anyways. I hope you enjoyed today's topic. If you did, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can also rate the show and share the link with your friends. Feel free to visit me in the cemetery at twistedlibracemetery.com. All my wicked creations are buried there. I have a little something for every dark soul. Thank you for joining me today, my lovelies. Until next time.